Super. So first of all, thank you, Sankar, for joining. And the topic again for today is very very fascinating. We'll come to that.
Right.
Before that, a very quick introduction to you about IMCI. It's part of the global consulting body. I'm not very sure how much you are familiar with IMCI. And Jay is there. I'm sure you would have, through him, you would have known much more. But this is, let's say, we have like a global chapter of ICMCI. India is one of the chapter. In fact, it was one of the founding team members, one of the 7 founding team members of the global body back in the 70s. And since then, we function with about 7+ different chapters across different cities, Mumbai being the main headquarter for IMCI India. So currently, this program, let's say we are conducting it from IMCI Pune, but the blessing in disguise that we talk about currently is we could have members across the chapter joining in. So while we record it, there are many requests where they would want to see it later on as well. So there are people who still want to join, but due to their schedule, if they are not able to, at least this recording is something that they'll be accessing later. Uh,
Right.
Now, within, let's say, IMCI, one of our main objective is how can we standardize the practice of consulting, which do not really enjoy a very good name generally. Now, the whole idea is how can we make this practice, uh, of course, right up there in the standard of a global practice, with something which is very critical in one of in the talk that you will also do the governance part of it. How
Right.
can we have the code of conduct, etc., in place? So this is what basically we do at IMCI. All the members, all the participants today are either running their own consulting business or they are part of a consulting group by and large.
Right. Right.
Right. So with that, I think, as I said, we'll just kickstart the program. And the format is how we'll do it is maybe uh, you can speak for about 40-45 minutes, and there'll be flexibility. You can also let
Right.
us know the way you would want
Right.
to take it up, and I'm sure there'll be a lot of questions. So either if we can pause at different levels and take those questions, we can also do it that way as well.
Right.
Right. So for all of you, thank you very much, everyone, for joining another session, and a very exciting one in our series of knowledge talks. This time, if you are seeing a pattern that we are talking about, from the digital uh, to more focusing around how do we look at today's time, and see how we can value add our different customers across the board. This talk is, I think, taking us to something which we come across quite regularly as consultants, whether it is, let's say, a scenario of a perfect marriage of two different companies, and the problems as consultant that all of us face, to something like, it's a very common concept that as far as consulting solutions, we may have a lot, but the organization may have a different different bent of mind, which definitely create those clashes. So to a lot of scenarios which talks about environmental, social, and governance, which I think is extremely relevant in the work that we do. And I'm very glad that ESG is really gaining a lot of ground in India currently, because of all the matrix which is looked at very, very carefully. And these are by even the bankers, for example. This is one of the key things that they want to look at, because this gives you something which is not there in the balance sheet straight away, which is not available through maybe the write-ups, or let's say the PR write-ups, which a lot of us also go through. This is that aspect of it. This gives us a sneak peek of the board, for example, what is their thought process. So I think from that point of view, extremely relevant would this discussion be. And someone who can really do complete justice for us is Sankar, because if you look at his illustrious career, I think he has really seen things very, very closely to be speaking about this. in his current capacity, he definitely is the group CEO of Equity Ratings and Research, which is, by the way, accredited rating agency by the RBI. But there are some other areas or things that Sankar has done is even equally exciting. Let's say being part of the board in IOCL, one of the Navratnas for us, to even working in the insolvency and bankruptcy code, being a working group member. So I think within his feathers, I mean, within his cap, there are a lot of feathers that we can definitely look at. And with that said, I think Sankar, we are glad and thank you very much. Please take over, and we'll be happy to listen.
Thank you, Chandan, and thanks, Jay, for inviting me. I think I can already see that this group is on an average much more experienced than me. Chandan, all the accolades or all the glorified stuff that you have spoken about me, I'll take it with a little bit of a pinch of salt. My specialization is ratings and research, and beyond ratings and research, I cannot claim that I have done too many things. But yes, on the rating side, I love it and it's my passion. So I continuously think about this one aspect which has led to do quite a few things which I would like to share today. Right? I have not made any presentation specifically for this group. So I'm reusing some stuff which I already made for some other groups. And therefore, I may skip some slides. So you'll have to bear with me on that. But more importantly, what I want to say is that stop me anywhere you feel. And if you have a question, you need not wait for the end of the presentation. If you choose to wait till the end of the presentation, it's perfectly all right. But I'll be happy if you have a question on any slide while I'm there. So that's perfectly all right. So today we are going to talk about ESG assessments and ratings. But before I start on ESG, let me give you a very short introduction about our company. Our company is called Equity Ratings and Research. Equity Ratings aspire to be the quality provider of bank loan ratings, bond ratings, SME ratings and gradings, and possibly all other ratings and grading products which requires statistical modeling. So if somebody asks me in an elevator, what is it that you want to do? I would say that I want to be present in all possible innovations in the area of ratings and gradings. Now, with that objective, what we have done is we have the group holding company is Equity Ratings and Research, which does bank loan ratings and bond ratings. But as a wholly owned subsidiary, we also conduct businesses like SME ratings and gradings. And now we have incorporated a company called ESG Risk Assessments and Insight to bring the concept of ESG rating in India. Right? So in the next few slides, what I will try to do is provide a sort of a perspective on why we are doing this and what exactly are being done under the ESG rating program. And we will also show you a little bit of glimpse on of the reports that we are producing. This I hope will give you a fair bit of an idea on what is ESG and what is ESG rating. So let me start with I have already covered this, so I'll skip the description of the group. Let me come to the services that we provide. We are providing top 500 ESG ESG rating of top 500 companies which are listed in NSE. So by market capitalization, we have taken up 500 companies and the rating reports are available on all 500 companies. Yesterday, we have launched the subscription, which is now available for anybody to subscribe. So be it a bank, be it a issuer themselves, they can come and they can pay for the subscription and get access to the reports. Banks and investors typically will need access to all 500 reports, but the companies themselves will require subscription to their own reports and their peer groups. So this is what we provide. We also conduct customized ESG assessment. So companies want ESG assessment on themselves, their peers, and most importantly, they want gap analysis to try and identify what they exactly need to do to be able to move ahead in a rating scale. So this is what is called customized ESG assessment. This is something we have a significant amount of capability on this. So we are also doing this. We also have ESG data catalog of 500 top Indian companies. Now, obviously, for the rating, we have to collect a lot of data, and this data is something that is of great interest for a lot of investors, and we are in a position to provide that. And for the unlisted companies, for ESG related projects, various kinds of green bonds that are being issued, there is a need for a lot of custom data collection, and we also have the necessary tie-ups to be able to provide that. So this is essentially what our services are. Who uses our reports, or who is supposed to use our reports, and for what purpose? So there are broadly 5 different purposes: portfolio selection and management, peer benchmarking, active and passive thematic investments, regulatory compliance, because ESG is now becoming mainstream in terms of regulatory disclosures. So regulatory compliance is a very important part right now, and continuous monitoring of ESG performance of the investee companies. So these are the things that can be done with the help of our ESG assessments. Not everything is relevant for every sector, but you can see that investors can take benefit of almost all the categories of use cases, whereas the corporates can make use of 3 categories, probably not all 5. So and so forth. This is broadly what is the purpose of the ratings. Now the question is, what is the relevance of ratings? Now, this is where I would like to tell a little bit of a story, and at the cost of some of the other slides. In 2015 or 16, there was a major credit failure that took place. A company known as Amtech Auto defaulted on their bonds, and they defaulted on almost 8,000 crore of bank loans. And subsequent to that, there are several other credits that failed, namely Ricoh, this is Japanese company. There were Religare, and Deccan Chronicle is another one. So there was a series of defaults that took place, and things gotten worse despite regulatory intervention. And ultimately, it actually culminated into 2 major AAA defaults. One is ILFS and the other is DHFL. Now, when we looked at this as a rating agency, we did not have anything to do with any of these clients because by nature we are a little bit of on the conservative side, and also the fact is that we are promoted by the banks and the government makes us think twice before taking unnecessary risk. However, as students of ratings, we evaluated and tried to go deeper into each of these defaults. And what came out very, very strongly is the fact that the signals of these defaults were already available from the governance practices of these companies. Now, this is a big revelation, right? So you have a rating model which you are using for God knows how many years, maybe industry-wide, it is a 150-year-old industry. So this is a model that is being used worldwide. And this model has failed to identify or predict defaults despite the fact that there were signals in the or deficiencies in the governance side. Now, given that fact, it first dawned upon us in the year 2018 and 19 that something needs to be developed and needs to be improved. But the rating models, the standard credit rating models, are also very highly regulated by the capital market regulators. So if you want to make changes in them overnight, you really cannot do that, because the question is to backtest all the new initiatives and confirm through statistical modeling that your changes are not going to make the model worse, and it will genuinely improve the system. So which is very, very difficult. So so we decided to consider a new rating model and not touching the credit rating model per se, but arrive at a new fundamentally different process to arrive at a new rating. And then while we were doing internal research, we realized that there are two other factors, which is E and S. And remember, all this is happening in 2019 when in entire 2019, if you search news with the keywords E, S, and G, you will not find any article published in India. So practically, it is what we hear today. It's a flavor of the time. That was not the case in 2019. So it was not so intuitive, not so commonsensical at that point of time. But what we figured out through various kinds of data and other stuff is that India, being a very highly populated country, automation being a very, very important focus area for all the large corporates to improve their productivity and profitability, our over dependence on agriculture in terms of our rural economy, a very large and long coastline, which is very highly populated as well, makes us predisposed to the risks of climate risk as well as the social risks, right? So what it means is that if India does not achieve, or the world does not achieve, the targets given by the Paris Accord, and the temperature really goes up by more than 2%, then you will have a large part of our coastlines getting submerged. People in Bangladesh will be, will see major migration from low-lying areas and possibly entering even India. And automation will cause a huge amount of problem, for a social problem, in terms of keeping pace with the need for employment generation. So with all this, we figured out that E, S, and G risks are going to play the most important role going forward in terms of the worsening of credit risk per se. I can see one person raising his hand, so I cannot see his name. There is someone who has raised the hand.
Yes, that's correct. What I would actually request is maybe if we can have these questions on the chat, and then we can come to it in a more structured manner.
Yeah, that also that is also perfect. Yeah.
Yeah. So periodically, maybe we'll just take a pause and then maybe address those questions. That will be easy.
So the World Economic Forum's data reconfirms our perception, and we could clearly see that from 2009 to 2019, the environmental risk has exponentially increased from being 0 to 3 now. The societal risk has also, it went down in between, but it has now increased once again, and it has started rising. And thanks to the advent of new technologies in the area of automation, and of course, some of the climate risk also translate into social risk, while the commonsensical economic risks has actually really come down, till 2019. And remember that this is not considering the pandemic impact. Pandemic has once again increased the economic risk, but we can argue that the entire pandemic risk is actually arising out of ESG risk. Whether you want to believe in the conspiracy theories, or if you want to plain and simple believe that it is the change of climate which is going to cause more viruses to migrate from animals to humans, and so on. You still can argue that, last 1 year what has happened, largely ESG could be one of the major factor to contribute to that risk. So this is what is the changing risk landscape that we can see. Now the question is that what do the companies and the countries do with increasing risk environment where the risk is increasing? What should the country and what should the companies do? The first is that ESG, the risk management framework has to be built, right? So like I'm running a company, I have to ensure that my company is mitigating the governance risks. If you're a bank, if you're running a bank, you have to ensure that your board diversity is there, your gender diversity is in place, your data center does not consume a lot of power and generate a lot of carbon, and so on and so forth. So the risk management framework is a very important aspect of managing today's business. And when an investor or a lender wants to invest in a company, what they are really interested in is whether the company has ability to build a risk management framework and implement that framework and monitor that framework. This is essentially what what is becoming important, and this is what is being evaluated through the risk rating model that we have developed. So I'll come to that in a while. Why it is relevant to the corporates? Because increasingly what we are seeing is that a large number of investors in North America and Scandinavian countries particularly, they have become very, very conscious about ESG related risk. Canada and Northern Europe is highly predisposed to the climate risk, and therefore it is their regulators and their investors are extremely conscious of not investing in any company which is not doing enough for mitigating climate risk. So for the companies to get investments, it is increasingly going to become more difficult if they don't move from being merely conventional business to being ESG leaders. So getting cheap money, getting cheap equity is going to be more and more difficult unless the company has incorporated risk management framework, and unless they have incorporated ESG principles in their day-to-day running of businesses. So this is the reason why corporates are indulging into ESG practices. Now enters the concept of ESG rating. ESG rating, how does the rating help the corporates? Companies can stop at adopting ESG principles and build a risk management framework and stop there, right? But as we are all aware that what you don't measure, you can't improve. So that is where the importance of measuring what the company is doing in every aspect of ratings, every aspect of ESG, and therefore convey to the whole world and all the stakeholders how they stand vis-a-vis other opportunities. So a rating which is standardized, which has a common sized framework, allows all the stakeholders to measure the performance of the company, relative performance of the company, and that's why corporates will find it very useful. They already find it very useful because ESG rating has become a mainstream concept in large economies. The disclosure standards improve. What we have seen in the other countries where ESG rating is mainstream is that the disclosure standards of companies have exponentially improved once ESG rating has come in place. So the companies who are not disclosing enough, and we'll come to that in some time because I have some good amount of data on how Indian companies are disclosing and what are their disclosure standards, are how transparent are they. what we have seen is that after 3-4 years of ESG rating being in place, the companies start disclosing much more, and the quality of disclosures are also very, very good. They can monitor the risks and the financial impact of the risk on their performance. They can benchmark their performance with other peers. So if Indian Oil Corporation is highly predisposed to the climate risk issues, and they think that they're doing well, they will also want to compare the initiatives of other global and Indian peers and try to find out whether they are, whether they are following the best practices and they are really there or not, right? So this is broadly on one side. On the other side, investor diversity and finding investment opportunities is one of the factor. Identifying strengths and weaknesses where the companies has to, finding the gaps where they need to improve, and most importantly, the biggest impact that ESG has is on the operational efficiency of the companies. The whole crux of ESG is that you take less from the system and you give back more, and that is eventually going to lead to cost savings, because naturally, if you are consuming less coal to produce same amount of steel, you are taking less and giving back more. If you are consuming water, are you are you consuming less and are you producing more? These are the questions which eventually lead to better ESG rating, and therefore a good rating invariably will mean better cost structure of the company. So this is the use of the rating for the benefits of that people can draw from the ratings. Now let me come to the ESG assessment and how we actually have gone ahead and built the rating model. So now this is a little technical part, so let me try and simplify as much as possible, because it is possible to explain the model over 3 hour or a 4 hour session, and I'll have to explain the entire thing in probably in 5 minutes. What we are doing is let me show this one slide, just a moment. Yes. So at the heart of the rating model is our taxonomy. Now, when we looked at ESG parameters, we first identified almost 1400 data points which falls in this category. So look, like for example, to give an example of the board composition of the company, there are several data points within that. The who are the board members, what is their gender, what is their age, what is their experience, and so on and so forth. So for every parameter, for every factor, we identified a library of data points, and the total number of such data points was 1400 to start with. Then all the data points are not disclosed by the companies, or all the data points are not available from any sources. So we had to do away with some data points because they are not really usable. So I cannot build a model with the help of those data points. But we found that 739 data points are required to be disclosed by these companies or are available from many other sources. These 739 data points can be categorized in 525 indicators. And these 525 indicators are then classified into key issues, which are in 35 key issues and 19 themes and 3 categories. 3 categories are essentially E, S, and G. And then in the 19 themes that we have, like how is the board, how is management, how are shareholders' rights managed, particularly the minority shareholders, what is the management ethics, what is the quality of ESG reporting, what are they doing in terms of anti-takeover policies, and so on and so forth. Similarly, on the social side, we are looking at employee diversity, human rights, social supply chain management, community, and so on and so forth, right? In terms of the environmental factors, we are looking at themes like water, waste, energy, emission, environmental innovation, and so on and so forth. These are the categories that we have identified. Now, once we identified and built this taxonomy, what we did is that for about 200 sectors or industries, we looked at each of these indicators, 525 indicators, and assigned a weight or a materiality. We internally call it materiality, but it is nothing but a weightage that we assign to each of these indicators. Now, it depends on industry to industry what weightage is given to each factor. Like, for example, if I have to give an example of a banking sector. Now, in a banking company, emission risk is not a very high risk, and therefore my materiality for that particular factor is not going to be very high. It will have some weightage, but it will have a small weightage, because the only thing that consumes a lot of power is at the data center of the bank. But in terms of operation of a bank, it is a very small percentage of the power that is being consumed. While gender diversity of the workforce or the board diversity are very, very important factors when it comes to a bank. But when it comes to, say, airline companies, emission is a very, very important factor. And I may not have as high a weightage on gender diversity in an airline industry as much as I will want to have a high weightage on emissions, right? So this is what is called materiality, and we have identified or assigned a materiality score, materiality number to each of these 525 indicators. There is also another thing that we use to assign to each of the indicators is what we call a polarity. A polarity essentially means that there are indicators where the indicator value, when it is high, it actually is bad for the rating. And then there are other indicators when the value of the indicator is high, it is actually good for the rating outcome. So this is what is called materiality. So if an indicator has positive materiality, I add to the scores. It's called additive score. And when an indicator actually negatively impacts a rating, I call it negative polarity, and I subtract scores from the score that I give to the give on that particular parameter. So this is what is called a data taxonomy, and it's a very tedious process to look at every industry and assign this polarity and materiality for each of the parameters. But this is at the heart of the model, right? So I have really explained some of these slides, but it is probably good to see it once again on the screen. In financial services, the materialities are low on employee strikes because it really does not impact one or two strikes in a year, does not really impact ESG performance of the company. Child labor is not an issue because you cannot really employ child in a bank. Workplace injuries is not a risk because you are really not working with hazardous material here. Whereas product safety, employee diversity, community lending, SRI investment, and even, say, for example, data security are stuff that is very, very important in this sector. So now, when you compare with our taxonomy with the global standards, GRI is a global standard, and what we have done in Equite, we have tried to take us in one step ahead of the global standards. Because what is going to be our unique value proposition, or what is going to be our differentiator, is this coverage that we have. So if you look at environment, we have grid and transmission loss percentage as one of the data point. which is not covered under GRI, it is covered by us. And similarly, sustainable wood products, environmental product service target process update, social labeling on product packaging, business continuity plan, director related party transaction for the board members, key managerial personnel related party transactions. So these are things that we capture in our taxonomy, which is unique to our this thing. Apart from that, what also makes us unique is that our rating model is India specific. So there are many rules or regulations in India in terms of related party or board diversity. Like, for example, women board membership is very unique to India. Independent directors is very unique to India. So these are the regulations that is very specific to India. And we don't want to penalize Indian companies on these parameters just because the international companies don't have to go by these kind of, they are not subjected to some of these regulations. So that is another aspect that we have taken care of. The data sources that we consider, this question comes how do we collect this data and where does it come from? So there is this debate going on for a long time whether we charge the companies who are being rated and we collect data from these companies. Here we don't entirely depend on the company for information, because we need to validate what the company is disclosing, and we have to cross-check from other sources of information. So our sources are annual disclosures, the company's own websites, the stock exchanges, and most importantly, news. What we capture from news is controversies, corporate events, directors changes, and those kind of things. So these are factors we capture from news, and they actually impact the rating. So if there is a controversy which has taken place in recent times, it will impact the ratings more. But as the controversies will become distant in terms of going into distant past, their impact will be lower and lower in the subsequent years. So this is how the model is designed. The process of this is that we collect data. All the data goes into a software. We are completely end-to-end electronic when it comes to ESG ratings. So our system ingests the data and throws up a score. So the software decides the score at the first level. These scores are then aggregated into a entire report, and this report is reviewed by the analyst. This is where the analyst work starts. The analyst uses peer benchmarks and looks at the entire universe, and they assign the rating for each category, and then the final rating is arrived at by aggregating all the individual parameters. The rating scale is from AAA to C. There is no D because we are not into the credit rating business where we can recognize default. But all other rating scales are there. Scales are there. AAA being the best, and BBB is probably a company with a good track record, whereas BB rated companies will have a lot to aspire from where they are, and B and C will probably the worst. Will be the worst in the entire scale. So this is what it is. Another difference with the credit rating scale of AAA to D is that there are no modifiers. So typically you will find that there are ratings of AA plus and AA minus, which is also there in addition to AA. But in case of in our case, we are not assigning any plus or minus sign to the ratings. Apart from ratings, what we also provide is an overall transparency and bearer transparency. So for example, if the company is expected to disclose, say 100 data points, and they have only disclosed 60 data points, then I say that the transparency is 60 upon 100 or 60%, which is unique in our case. Because, and why we are doing it, because we want to encourage companies to disclose more and be more transparent. So unless I, how will the efficacy of my ratings be better? My efficacy of my ratings will be better if the disclosures of the company are of very high standards and they are adequate. So to incentivize disclosing more, we have created the transparency model, and for every rating we are also providing the transparency score along with the rating. Right now, let me come to the report, and this is, I'll quickly go through it and then we can open it up for questions. So the rating report is very intuitive and very simple. So this is a company which is involved into oil marketing and refining, and as you can see that the company has got a score of 483 on 1000. The company's BRR score, which is a transparency score. BRR is basically the SEBI requirement of business responsibility disclosures. So this company is disclosing 60% of their required disclosures, whereas the industry average is also very similar at around 61. The transparency score is 61, where the average industry score is 63. And the environmental score is 256, social score is 128, and governance score is 99, which adds up to the company score of 483. In this particular industry, the average score is 488. So this is essentially what you get in a snapshot. You compare. We have masked the name of the companies here because the data is obviously only available to the subscribers. But you can actually compare the companies and see which peer is doing well. So in environmental score, this company has done better than 2 of its peers, but they are behind 2 other peers. The overall ESG ranking is 3rd in the industry, where 5 other players are also rated by us. This report is a little dated, about a month back. So at that point of time, we had 70 issuers which were rated, and in the 70 amongst the list of 70 issuers, this company stood 29th in terms of their rating. So this is how you read the report. The report is a fairly detailed 20-25 pages report, and each page deals with separate issues. You have compliance and transparency. You drill down to drill down further in terms of disclosure counts or transparency, saying that in biodiversity, out of the 3 disclosures that are required, they have disclosed 2, and so on and so forth. This is the leaderboard, so you actually can see the number of peers and where they stand, and which quartile they stand out of within their universe. You can see the controversies and where the controversy lies. So each controversy is given a score. There could be low impact negative news, and there could be very high impact or negative news. When we are looking at news, we are only looking at negative controversies. We are not really looking at positive news. It doesn't impact the rating, because typically the company's disclosure itself is good enough for those parts. So I would like to end here. We can go on, and I hope that I have been, whatever I said, I could explain it well. I can see some questions. So Chandan,
yes.
How do we go about it? Do I take up some of these questions, or I will wait to hear them out?
Right. So we'll do it. In fact, both ways. But maybe I can modulate the questions and maybe have if someone wants to also add, they can unmute and also ask the question.
Right. Right.
So I think Sankar, first of all, thank you very much. I think this really gives us a good sneak in terms of what is behind ESG rating, which I'm sure is much closer than we anticipate in corporate India for sure.
Right.
So now with this, let's say we took account of what goes behind the entire rating framework,
Right.
and let's say the set of individual data, which and the weighted averages and the industry variations depending on the importance, etc. Now, with that said, let's maybe just go slightly behind our timeline, which
Right.
is the question of Shrikant that I want to take it up. Let's say
Right.
today we have ESG rating. So I can, in fact, Shrikant, I can right away answer that we didn't have ESG rating then. But I mean, today we have the richness of this data. But if we go back and look at some of the bigger setbacks that we had, maybe Satyam and LFS and some of the things which happened in 16 and 17 that you mentioned, uh,
Right.
which had a very big impact. Now with ESG, what do you think that are the aspects which we are covering, number one? And
Right.
number two, how could ESG would have prevented them or maybe raised an alarm before it would have happened?
Right. So Satyam is a very it's an extremely favorite question of the world when it comes to talking to a rating agency person. But I was around in the rating industry at that time, so I can say with confidence, uh, Satyam was not a rated company. A lot of people don't know, despite being such a large company, there was no rating outstanding on Satyam. We did rate the company. I was working with a different rating agency at that time. And at some point of time, we indeed rated that company, but the company did not accept the rating. And the extent law in the country requires the rated entity to accept the rating in order to make it public, right? So you can use your imagination to figure out, why they have rejected the rating and why they have refused to accept the rating. Today's situation is slightly different. Today, what the regulator says is that you rate, and whether you accept or not, you disclose the rating to public. Had that regulation be around at that time, people would have been able to see that the company is not doing all that well on some of the counts, and take precautionary actions, right? Now, what went wrong in case of Satyam? In retrospect, all of us know that there was a huge issue with governance. Auditors were being manipulated, auditors were being shared wrong information, and auditors were happily accepting the wrong information and did whatever they had to do. The promoter was siphoning off money. Promoter has been doing all sorts of things. The board was not performing its duties in terms of the keeping a tab on the activities of the management. Probably board was not kept in the loop, and so on and so forth. Now, what will change with the advent of credit ratings in general and ESG in particular? Now, as each of these credit failures have taken place, the regulators and the system has become more and more stringent. So today, the kind of disclosures that we expect is tremendous, right? So, like for example, there are related party transactions. For example, the rules are very different from what it used to be in 2004 and 2003 to what it is today. The independent directors on the board is a major factor. Today there are these proxy advisors who actually advise the shareholders on voting. And when the independent directors appointment proposal goes to the AGM for voting, in many cases in the last 2 years, what we have seen is that the shareholders have voted against the appointment of the independent directors, and the company could not go ahead with the appointment. And why it happened? It happened because the disclosures standards are better, and a third party is evaluating whether the appointment was entirely fair or not. And we have seen that, wives of the promoters were appointed as women directors in the board, and today regulators have come up with a new regulation where they're saying that related party cannot be treated as a woman director on the board. Now, what happens is that when the regulator makes data available, how do you judge a company? Data is available, regulators have done their job, that disclosure has happened. But how do you compare between two companies, and how do you choose where the risk lies, and which company is going to be able to mitigate, and which company will shareholders of which company will suffer? For that, you need to build a framework. Otherwise, it will be your whims and fancies, because of which you will say, okay, this company is good and this company is bad. You don't want to do that, right? You need to have a comparative framework which allows you to compare between two companies and with confidence choose what is good and what is bad. So DHFL and ILFS are classic examples where the rating agencies primarily assigned a very high rating to ILFS because of the shareholders on board and their representation on the board of ILFS, right? But they missed out on the other factors, that the CEO of the company has been there for donkey's years, and the transparency and the disclosures, they were compromised in many cases. These are things which is there for people to see, but in absence of a rating model, it is very difficult to translate that information into a go no go decision, right? So this is the limited point that we want to bring on the table, that today the data is whatever data is available. There are a lot of stuff which is already available. You have all the controversies in the world, right? It is very difficult today. You have the whistleblower policies, you have the PSA guidelines, you have various kinds of things which brings out information from the company. It is very difficult to hide some of these things. But the problem is that the volume of data that is available is humongous. And putting this data into a framework so that they are comparable across companies and across years, and figure out whether the company is better than the other companies or whether the company is improved from the previous year or not, is something that is impossible unless you have a model. So we provide that model, and that's the purpose.
Sure.
Okay.
So yeah, so from here, I would, so Srikanth, would you also like to just follow up, or this is good in terms of the information?
No, I have just one more question.
Yes.
Yeah, he gave us one example of some company where the rating was 483.
Right.
Isn't it?
Right.
Now, just for my information, whether 483 is a good rating or bad rating, or I mean, how do you judge that the rating is good and the company can be relied on?
Right. So as I said, that the rating, what you saw on that slide is a score. So 483 translates into a double B rating, right? And so this is a 1,000-point scale. So 0 to 1,000 is the rating, and let's say 890 to 1,000 is AAA. So the AAA is the best. And if a company is anywhere above 890, then it is treated as AAA. And then you know that, how they compare with each other. But within AAA, there could be one company with 900 score and another company with 925 score. So if you want to compare between AAAs, within the AAAs, then you have to look at the score. But at a broad level, it is good enough to look at the rating, and people understand rating better. You know that AAA is good. You don't know whether 483 is good or bad, but you know that AAA is good and AAA is not that great. So this is the short answer.
Okay. Thank you so much, Shankar.
Thank you. Thank you.
Right. Anuj, I think it also sort of answers your part. If you want to follow it up, you can also maybe check.
I wanted to weigh the ratings in terms of what actual names are. So if we've got a flavor of, let's say, some AAA company, if there is one,
Right.
and some AA. So then we know who are the kind of stalwarts and who are the
Right.
laggards, just to see the sliding scale. how to
Right.
get
Right.
from there.
So, for example, Indian Oil Corporation is a A-rated company, and at this, this is strictly confidential because this is only available to my subscribers, and we have just launched the subscription yesterday. So there is still some time before we can create our set of controversies. But the credit rating of Indian Oil Corporation, for example, is a AAA credit rating, right? So it's a AAA credit because they are quasi-government entity, and the government has they're a government company, and they have in most cases they borrow from the market with the tacit government guarantee. So naturally, their rating is AAA. But when it comes to ESG rating, they are far from AAA, and their rating is A. And of the 500 companies, A is the best rating that we have assigned so far. So no company has been able to reach above A, which is a very interesting piece of information, because when these companies are all accustomed to getting AAA from the rating agencies, and they find that their rating in ESG is not good enough, then there will be a lot of questions, how can I improve, and what I need to do, and why, some people will come to us challenging that you don't understand anything and you have given us a A rating, and so on and so forth. But this is a fact that even the now the interestingly ITC, for example, it's a very interesting case. ITC is probably a borderline AA. So my analysts are still yet to finalize ITC rating, but they may get into a AA kind of a rating. Now we all know that this company is a tobacco company, right? So tobacco company getting a high rating in ESG is something which is which is slightly awkward, right? But what is important to note here is not just the company's line of business, but the company's risk management framework, risk management mechanism. So if you are an investor or a lender in the company has to be sustainable in the long run. And for that, for achieving sustainability in the long run, they have to put up a risk management framework. So if they are in tobacco, obviously they run higher risk of litigation, of being subjected to regulatory action, reputation, and so on and so forth. But what we have noticed from their disclosures, their transparency that they have, and also the amount of initiatives that they are taking, they are by far ahead of the other players. Whereas you will notice that the companies and another good insight that I can tell you is that companies who have low ESG footprint, one such industry is IT industry. IT industry does not consume a lot of emissions, are not the issue. They employ a lot of women, so gender diversity is naturally much better in that sector. They don't employ child labor, so it's basically a benign industry, and who do most of the things pretty well without making much of an effort. But when we looked at the risk management framework, we noticed that they do much more than the companies who should be doing. So the rating of the ESG rating of the companies who are involved in IT have got much better score, because their disclosures are better, their initiatives are better, their risk management framework is better. Whereas the companies who are running businesses which are inherently risky, they are not doing as much as these IT sector. So this is another insight that we have found from the raw data that we have seen.
This is fantastic.
Just to
because
add to that, so Shankar,
Yeah.
I've been following ITC, and my next question follow-up was on ITC.
Okay.
ITC has been doing something called a triple bottom line,
Right.
right from early 90s, if
Right.
not late 80s.
Right.
That triple bottom line actually translates into what you call ESG measure today.
Yes.
So while the formal naming of ESG may have arrived of late in the last
Right.
5, 7, 8 years,
Right.
but the triple bottom line concept and these kind of existing from before.
Right.
Now, tobacco, though it is harmful, but if you
Right.
see ITC, the way they advertise, now in the last 1 year, they have been using the word ESG formally.
Right.
And they
Right.
say they are in the top quadrant of ESG,
Right.
especially in tobacco worldwide.
Exactly. Exactly.
So,
So if you look at their social footprint, they work with poor in rural areas.
correct.
Their water and wastage management is one of the best.
They are
Uh,
positive.
they're
Carbon
positive.
positive, water
Yeah.
positive, because of their Krishi
Right.
initiative. They are deep into environment, trees,
Exactly.
welfare of labor, women, etc. All
Right.
their mandis, what they call,
Correct.
they have the
E-choppals.
ITC Chopal,
Yeah.
that is also adding very deeply to it. So
Correct.
it's a very interesting play of
Yeah.
somebody who is actually not seen or seen as a sin industry, semi-sin,
Correct.
if you would
Correct.
like it, but is making all the efforts to come good. And
Yes.
ITC hotels, especially, if you look at from the last 15 years,
Right.
if you visit an ITC hotel, they display that we are environmentally positive.
Absolutely.
really
So
amazing.
I think the some of the stuff that we are seeing on the reports, and it gives me confidence when I hear from you
So
is
please
that
go ahead and declare them.
Yes.
We'll happily back you.
right. So this is it's a very personal thing. I actually when I think about ESG, it's a very personal thing for me because it's not just a job. Because the reason for that is that in our own lives, after a certain age, all of us are trying, or all of us have realized the importance of being responsible for everything, your society. Today you will find that many professionals in Bombay are actually paying for the maids vaccination from their pocket, right? Why do they do that? Because it's nothing but a individual or personal ESG awareness. I remember that 7 years back when I first time went to my fund manager, because I personally managing individual funds with my own hands is not possible in a ratings company, because I have access to insider information which I cannot use to my own gain. So my fund has to be managed by somebody else, and that somebody else wanted to know what are the industries where I would not like to invest. So at that time I did not have access to any ESG information. So I simply used my judgment or my moral standards to say that don't invest in tobacco, don't invest in oil, don't invest in these sectors. Rest all are open to you. But today I realize that it is probably not fair and the smartest thing to do. Probably, if I would rather prefer to invest in an oil company who, by virtue of their business, generates a lot of oil, but probably they are creating a huge carbon sink by use of technology or by use of something. If they can create a huge carbon sink, so let them emit a lot of carbon, but let them also absorb that same amount of carbon and give it back to the soil. So if somebody can create such a business, I don't want to say that that sector is out of my portfolio. Now this is a hypothetical example, and it's not going to be easy to find such kind of technology and find such companies who are creating this. But it is important for us to take a balanced view of things, because as a rating agency, we don't want to create such a disruption that no oil company can raise fund, or so India cannot do without oil or coal and so on and so forth, right? So our model is not to disrupt the coal industry, not to disrupt the oil industry. Our model is to incentivize the oil industry to innovate and negate the impact that they're causing to the system. So this is the way we have designed, and our focus is very, very limited to this.
Have you looked at, sorry Chandan, I
Yes.
seem to be hijacking this.
No problem.
I have
But
been
we are
reading about the
slightly
oil
tight on
companies.
time.
They have set up their own ESG rating standard. So I
Right.
attended a conference where all the Exxons of the world, all the Aramcos of the world, they all guys have got together and have awoken to the fact that ESG is coming in, and they
Right.
have set up their own social responsibility cells, and they are evolving their own. So, for example,
Right.
ITC, when they cut a tree, they plant a tree. So they do afforestation in the ratio of 1.7:1.
Right.
So which means that they are making good the environment, and at some point of time, the number of trees they cut will be less than the trees they grow.
Right.
But the oil guys, it's very difficult to go down Mother Earth and do something. So I think they are doing something there. It might be very interesting for you guys to work on that.
Absolutely. So almost all oil companies are trying to figure out renewable. They're trying to build their renewable businesses. BP has a significant solar business now. In India, typically the oil companies are within the purview of. See, for example, Reliance. If you look at Reliance, they have built an empire on data, which is far away from oil. Which is nothing but mitigating some of the risks that emerges out of the oil companies. But yes, the oil sector in India has to do a lot, and the progress of electric vehicles, electric chargers on highways, they are not at all satisfactory, and a lot could have been done by the oil companies. That's my message to the oil sector, that look at ITC and look at what they have done. And if you want a AAA rating or a AA rating, you have to do that. So that's pretty much what I have to say here.
Sure. So here we take a slightly skeptical view of this
Right.
with Sukant, and maybe you can substantiate as well your
Right.
question. So there are times when finally this rating is a congregation of different data points which are available, which are there maybe in public forum or maybe a specialized platform to which you may be privy of.
Right.
Some of these looks good. Let's say the question from Sukant. Some of these maybe the company is doing well. Everything shows very, very good. However, the promoter per se, the board representation is fine, but promoter themselves, the ethics is questionable. I mean, how do we really bring this up, or is there a way where ESG can bring this aspect up as well?
Yeah, so it comes in the track record, So I think we have a certain element of subjectivity in any rating model. In the credit rating model, the subjectivity element is much bigger. In this model, subjectivity element is much smaller. But I would caution my analysts to use that subjective judgment, misuse that subjective judgment. Now, for example, I should not be looking at a promoter and decide whether that person is ethical, unethical. I cannot do that. For me, he is ethical or average until I have evidence or I have news and past track record of that person doing something wrong. Right? Now, my entire emphasis on negative controversies is to figure out the track record of that promoter. And there I have a very rich data set. Like for example, I have data on companies who are non-cooperative with rating agencies. And companies who are non-cooperative with rating agencies, there is a question on the intent of the promoter, whether they want to cooperate. If they don't give information to the rating agencies, how will they be able to trust it in terms of any disclosure that they have? So I have access and methods to establish the intent of the promoter if there is a track record available. If there is no track record, I give a average score. But there is more likely, for the kind of companies that we are rating, these 500 companies, we will certainly have a lot of past information available. Right? You have information on related party, you have information on the kind of board members and the relationship between different board members, which is clearly evident. If I see that the independent director is also sharing a board of 5 other companies with the promoter, then we can conclude that he is not really that independent, right? So the beauty of this is that that while I don't penalize based on my perception of a person, but if something comes out in the past track record, which I closely watch on the about the company, and if it is proven fact, then I definitely ensure that that is not ignored in the rating process.
Sure.
So this makes you, so it makes it very black and white. Then you are not like depending on subjective judgment. I like this person because of the complexion, or he comes from East, so he might. In India, the challenge is that when you meet somebody from East, you say that, oh, that guy is from East, so he cannot do business, or he is from Western, one of the Western states. He is very
Enterprising.
enterprising or chindi. Most of the time these things work in the negative connotation. Why, if I'm from East, I will never, I'm not saying that I am like that, or you are like that, but the tendency that people have is that use value judgments to bring out negativity in certain people. Rating model cannot operate like that, right? So therefore we have to build a framework which actually becomes neutral for everybody. So that's where past track record brings out.
And besides, I think in such cases, the negative news which you are anyway capturing, we would maybe normalize the score in any ways. I mean, there'll be some checks and balance, not
Absolutely.
explicit. Sukant, would you want to follow it up, or we're good to move forward? I mean, you can unmute. Okay, good. Sankar, I have 2-3 questions, maybe a very quick one, because I know we are right already pushing the time. One, are we limited to these 500 companies? Because the market capitalization that we talk about today, it's dynamic. I mean, in today's world, and more so that we see in last 1 year, it's changing. So how are we expanding that base?
So my commitment to my board is that I will expand to 1,000 companies by December 2021, because BRSR guideline, which has come now, is mandatory for top 1,000 companies. So I have all the stuff that I need. I will have all the stuff that I need for top 1,000 companies. So 1,000 companies I will cover. I am in the process, so I've finalized my model for unlisted companies, and I'm in the process of starting the sales for that. But they're privately held companies, so I will not be able to disclose the rating to a third party. So I'll rate these companies, I'll give the rating report to them, and then they will disclose to their contacts or their investors or whatever. So just like a valuation report, So that's something that we will start in this month. And we are hoping that, the universe that will require a rating in the unlisted space will be far bigger than the 1,000 companies. Because we already rate, we already rated about 8,500 companies in a bank loan rating scale for the banks. So we know that it's a huge universe where there is a lot of potential. So, but the model is ready, the rating reports are ready. We are considered for the listed companies, we have access to 735 data points, but for the unlisted companies, we have access to fewer data points. So the model is a little more narrow in that sense, but it gives a good sense of the private companies, whether they are responsible or not. It gives a good sense. So we are convinced with that, and we are promoting that product.
Just a follow up on this. So does that also mean that there's one aspect which is basis some interviews, etc., which we also do? So one is the data which is available. Second is, do we also substantiate it with maybe some physical meetings, etc.?
Yeah. So for the listed companies, physical meetings are not really required, because to be very honest, everything about these top 500 companies are already available in public domain. The challenge is not availability of data. Challenge is complete explosion, or the huge amount of noise that exists, and cleaning up that data. That's where the effort is. Right. For the private companies, what happens, what we have some expertise in, because we do the ratings in any case, because there also we are dependent on the company to give us information, and we cannot take everything at face value. Like, for example, if company is asked that what is your risk management framework, how are you going to mitigate that risk, I cannot really take it at a face value, right? So I have to see what the company is claiming, what is his past track record on meeting those claims, and whether there are other precedents in the same industry, whether people have done it or not. Like for example, in credit rating, what typically will happen is that the company will say that I will achieve 90% capacity utilization. My analyst will say, well, your industry does not have 90% capacity utilization, so how are you going to achieve it? If the company has a good plan to achieve it, we are convinced. But if the company doesn't have a good plan to back up, then I will be able to figure out whether that information can be taken with a pinch of salt, or it can be taken at face value.
Sure. Again, coming from credit risk side, I may have a lot of questions, but maybe I'll take a pause here. Just also, Shankar, thank you very, very much, because what this has done to us is given us a sneak to something which all of us in our different matrix that we do. Pestclay was the closest, I guess, that most of the consultants or fellow consultants would have anyway done. But this is basis a lot of data and the importance of data, which is also industry wide. So there's some sort of benchmarking that it brings to the table as well. And the brilliant example of a tobacco company versus an IT company and a banking company that we were talking about. So I think to that extent, it is fantastic. From a credit, let's say from a credit bureau, what they were able to do with the scores, and which is very visible now, is to make people conscious about how to be a good credit citizen.
Exactly.
So similarly, I see a parallel here with ESG. What it can very well do is maybe incentivize companies to be complying more and more, and to be very conscious about their ESG scores as well. It's something which is very, very new, but certainly I think becomes a very important indicator for all of us. So I think to that, I mean, it was very exciting to understand and to know about it. So we all really thank you for that. There are some questions though, which is around the pricing model of the service that you launched yesterday. So maybe what I would request is if there's some standard material which is available, which also talks about the pricing and everything, if you can share that, whatever is possible, then we can obviously share it across.
Sure. So what I'll do is that I will send a document. I'll share a document in terms of how you can get access to the reports, or your clients can get access to the reports, and what will be the some indicative pricing. Because pricing is actually customized depending on who needs what. But I can tell you, roughly speaking, if somebody wants to access, say, 5 companies tracker, then I will probably charge 2 lakh rupees after the inaugural discounts and stuff that is going on right now. I'll be happy if it will be around 2 lakh rupees. Exact numbers my BD guys can tell, but that is the ballpark number. We are this particular part of the business is being built with a lean business development or a sales team. So the focus is to be transparent and not get into haggling. So therefore the pricing has been kept very, very transparent and this thing. So one offer goes, if somebody is entitled for some discount, that discount is already given. He doesn't have to ask for it. And that's how it works. Whereas a bank, when he subscribes to the full all 500 companies tracker, the subscription fee could run into about 30 lakhs, because the bank is a heavy consumer of the reports. Whereas if there is a 5-user brokerage house who wants to access 100, 200 companies report, the fee will be anywhere between that range, depending on what its requirements. So on the lower end, it could be 2 lakh rupees. On the higher end, it could be 30, 35 lakh rupees, depending on how many users and so on and so forth. What I see as a lot of opportunity is for you guys is to advise companies on how to improve their rating. Now, I cannot rate a company and at the same time tell them what changes they need to do or what policies they should adopt and all that. So it is not ethical on my part to do that. We do gap analysis, to tell people what kind of gaps they have vis-a-vis their peers and stuff. So we have a lot of capabilities. So if you want to advise a company and then come to us for those capabilities, it is good business for you. It is good business for me also. So rating and gap analysis is something that we can carry out, and you can advise your client exactly what they need to do. And if that sounds an important, a good business opportunity for you, because trust me, companies are willing to spend a good amount of money in getting ESG compliant, and they know that without help they will not be able to. So today I had a long chat with the risk head of ICICI Bank, and they were clear that there are certain things that without external help they will not be able to do. So here also same thing applies, and it's a good opportunity for management consultants. And if you think that it will help you build a business, I'll be more than happy to provide the back-end engine for you in terms of doing the ratings and the gap analysis, and then you work with the companies on ground.
This is extremely relevant. I think it opens an avenue for.
So Chandan, if I may add, one
Yes,
of the
sure.
reasons why they decided to invite Shankar for this is because they're pioneering something, and the words ESG itself is not understood or misunderstood, because there are new terms as far as the Indian business is concerned. The top end businessmen understand it, but there is a vast scope for learning for everybody, including consultants. So there's a huge opportunity that is waiting to be done. And I think what Shankar's team has done is some fantastic work. I mean, I can vouch for that. They've done some fantastic work. But this industry is yet to open. But globally, this is becoming and even globally, this has not been fully exploited. So I think that India is going to be one of the early ones. And what Shankar's team has done is actually they take this idea, and then they seed this idea in all the emerging markets. So even if our fraternity wants to take these ideas and go global, Anuj, incidentally, Shankar, I didn't mention this to you. Anuj is the president of the Indian, IMCI, the Indian arm of the global.
Okay.
Anuj is an ex-TCS guy. He's got tons of experience as a consultant and with a lot of global links. I mean, you would have got a flavor of that from his questions.
Right.
So there is a huge thing, because many of us in the consulting fraternity have been people who have been doing the same old,
Right.
and we have not kept ourselves up to date with the latest things. And I think that's when this recording also goes out, people might like to use that opportunity to educate themselves, because that's one of the things we attempt to do, as he said. And I think so. This is a fantastic opportunity to keep ourselves, enter into something new.
Sure.
So thank you so much for your, very detailed explanations, because I think for people who didn't know the subject and the concept and who have not been tracking this industry, today has been a primer which they can use to take it further if they choose to.
Thank you, Jay. Thanks for providing me with the opportunity to speak to the group, and look forward to talking to all the people as and when if anybody wants to have any further information on ESG or credit rating, please don't hesitate in contacting me. I am pretty much available 16-17 hours a day. So we'll be very happy to work with all of you. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you very much, Shankar, and I appreciate you extending the time as well for us.
Thank you.
We definitely will reach out to you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye, guys.